become infectious to humans even if it's not coexisting with the human flu, right?
Well, if it mutates like it did in this individual,
like in the Louisiana
or
case.
in the case in Canada. But that sometimes is a random, slower process.
Okay.
But if you have that co-infection, then you can share genes.
Okay.
And that's a really, to me, the spring and the summer where we had all of the dairy cattle to farm worker exposure, we didn't have human flu circulating. So now we're entering a much more dangerous period, yet we're still not testing. And we should be providing tests free of charge to dairy farm workers so they can test anonymously weekly, because they'll want to know if they have both cases of potential flus co-circulating in their own body to protect their families. If you tell them the risk and you give them the tools, they will utilize them to protect themselves and their family.
So, given this double whammy that you laid out, do you think it's just a matter of time until there's just a full-fledged pandemic here?
Well, certainly we're setting ourselves up for that potential, which, I flash back to January of 2020, and I'm hearing the same words come out of the CDC.
Like what?
Low risk of human-to-human transmission. Didn't we hear that from the WHO and the CDC about COVID? So I think our way through this is to use 21st century technology. Remember, it was the private sector that gave us tests within weeks. We went from 20,000 tests to 2 million tests. So if we got the private sector engaged in our response, they would help us get tests out to all of the dairy farms, all the poultry farms, where they could test both the chickens and the people exposed to the chickens, and then we would know how far spread this virus was. Right now, we're just looking for symptoms again. We should never be tracking viruses through symptoms. You don't see a virus through a symptoms. You see the virus through the test, and we know from COVID, most of the spread was asymptomatic. If we had been testing in January, as many other countries were, we wouldn't have had the spread that we had. So I'm hoping we learn from.
But it sounds like it doesn't. It sounds like from what you're laying out, you don't think this country has learned from the COVID pandemic. And there's not a sense of urgency right now.
Our agencies are making the same mistakes they made with COVID. The number 2 principle of pandemic is detect. And the only way to detect for viruses is to test. You cannot see a virus through symptoms. You miss so many cases. Yet we're still talking about flu-like illness. Well, there is no flu-like illness. There's RSV, respiratory syncytial virus that causes croup. Parents know what that is. There's mycoplasma pneumonia circulating right now. There's flu circulating right now, and soon there'll be COVID circulating. Those are all coughy respiratory illnesses that look the same. We should not be tracking illnesses by symptoms. We should track them only by testing so that parents know whether their child has RSV or flu so they can protect their grandparents. And the grandparents can know whether they have RSV or flu or COVID, because flu and COVID are treatable. So we need diagnostic tests out there. And I know if CMS tomorrow said, you know what, we're not going to pay for that doctor's visit unless you have a definitive diagnosis, we'd have better respiratory tests within 4 weeks, because our private sector will respond. If there's a need and there's a way to be reimbursed, they will make the product.